I still remember the way they said it, like it was already decided. We were in a glass conference room on the 21st floor, downtown Detroit, winter light cutting through the blinds, everything cold and sharp. My mother sat beside my stepfather, both dressed like they were meeting a banker, not their own daughter. Across from them, my half-sister Vanessa leaned forward with her hands neatly folded, her nails perfect, her smile polite and empty. Their attorney slid a folder toward me and said, "We're prepared to resolve this today." Then my stepfather looked me straight in the eye and delivered the demand like a grocery list. "The house," he said. "The cars. And Hawthorne Fabrication. All of it." No tremble in his voice. No shame. Not even anger. Just certainty. My lawyer, Marianne Cole, tightened her grip on my forearm under the table. I felt her nails through my sleeve. She leaned in and whispered, "Mara, don't even think about it. We can fight this. We have a case." I didn't respond. I just kept my face still while my stomach turned. Hawthorne Fabrication wasn't just a company. It was my grandfather's life. It was the sound of machines humming long after sunset, the smell of cutting oil, the way he wore pride like a uniform even when he was exhausted. It was the reason I grew up learning invoices before I learned how to drive. It was the reason I had built a life that didn't collapse when my marriage did. And now they were asking for it like it belonged to them. Vanessa tapped the folder and sighed like she was tired of waiting. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "Just sign. We'll be reasonable after." That word, reasonable, almost made me laugh. I looked at the folder, then up at their faces. The three of them were calm. Too calm. They weren't negotiating. They were collecting. I should have walked out right then. I should have let Marianne unleash everything we had. But I didn't. Because I'd already seen what happened when you fought them head-on. They didn't fight fair. They fought with guilt. They fought with family. They fought with little lies whispered to the right people, until you looked crazy for defending yourself. So I sat there and let the silence stretch. My mind drifted back to the shop. My grandfather, Walter Hawthorne, started it in the late 70s with a rented bay, one used mill, and a reputation for never missing a deadline. He built custom parts for automotive lines, precision brackets, dies, fixtures, anything the big plants needed yesterday. People trusted him because he didn't bluff. If he said he could do it, he did it. If he couldn't, he said no. When I was a kid, I'd sit on a tall stool by his desk, legs swinging, listening to him talk to engineers on the phone. He'd draw on scrap paper while he explained tolerances like he was telling a story. He taught me that 1,000th of an inch could be the difference between a clean assembly and a production shutdown that cost millions. My mother hated those days. She called the shop dirty. Too loud. Too masculine. She wanted a different life, and once she married my stepfather, she barely stepped inside the building again. Vanessa never cared at all. She saw the company the way some people see a lottery ticket, not a legacy. But my grandfather saw me. By the time I was 16, he had me logging inventory, learning vendor terms, watching how payroll worked. He taught me what a good client looked like and what a bad one sounded like. He taught me to read contracts like they were traps, because sometimes they were. One night, after everyone left, we stood at the back door watching the shop lights flicker off row by row. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "People think this place is machines and metal. It's not. It's trust. It's keeping your word even when it hurts. Most folks in your family don't understand that." I didn't realize he was planting a warning in my head. Years later, when he got sick, I was the one who showed up. I ran errands, handled paperwork, sat with him through doctor appointments. My mother visited when it made her look good. Vanessa posted photos online with captions about family love, then disappeared again. When my grandfather died, the will reading was not dramatic. It was quiet. A small office. A thick folder. A notary with a tired smile. And then the sentence that turned my world into a battlefield. Everything went to me. The company. The building. The equipment. His home in Grosse Pointe. Even the old pickup truck he loved like a dog. He left my mother a modest amount, enough to be generous but not enough to control anything. The anger didn't come immediately. At first, they acted wounded, like they were grieving. They brought food. They hugged my kids. They said all the right words. Then the questions started. How much is the company worth now? Are you planning to sell? What are you doing with the house? Wouldn't it be fair to share? I tried to keep things calm. I told myself they were just emotional. That grief made people weird. That family would settle down once the shock faded. Instead, they got hungrier. It started with help. My stepfather offered to handle vendors, to take pressure off me. Vanessa offered to modernize the books. My mother offered to coordinate paperwork because she said my grandfather would have wanted her involved. I said no at first. Then my divorce finalized, my schedule turned into chaos, and my kids started struggling with the back and forth between homes. I was running on caffeine and stubbornness. I was drowning in responsibilities that didn't come with pauses. So when they offered help again, softer this time, I let them in. That was my mistake. Because once they had access, their tone changed. They stopped asking. They started assuming. They started showing up at the house like it was theirs. They rearranged cabinets. They criticized repairs I approved. Vanessa started talking about our company in front of employees. I told myself it was temporary. Then I saw the first wire transfer. A large outgoing payment to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. When I asked Vanessa, she smiled and said it was process optimization. When I asked for paperwork, she said she'd forward it, then didn't. When I pressed, my mother sighed and told me I was being ungrateful. That's when Marianne came into my life. She was sharp, calm, the kind of lawyer who didn't raise her voice because she didn't need to. She listened to everything, then said one sentence that landed like a brick. They're not helping you, she said. They're positioning themselves. And now here we were, in this settlement meeting, with my family demanding the entire empire my grandfather built. My stepfather leaned back and folded his hands. We'll be generous with visitation, he said, like he was offering a favor. Vanessa smiled. You'll be free, she added. No more stress. My mother didn't smile at all. She just watched me, waiting for the moment I finally obeyed. Marianne squeezed my arm again. Mara, she whispered, don't. I looked at the folder. I looked at their faces. I felt something settle inside me, not fear, not anger, something colder and clearer. Because I wasn't here to win an argument. I was here to end the game. I nodded once, slowly, and said, fine. Their eyes brightened. I slid the folder toward me, uncapped the pen, and kept my voice steady as I added, you can have it all. And the way their smiles widened told me they still had no idea what was waiting on the other side of their victory. The second I said it, the room changed. My stepfather's shoulders dropped like a man who'd been carrying a weight and finally set it down. Vanessa's smile turned sharp, almost greedy, like she could already see the keys in her hand. My mother blinked fast, like she didn't trust what she'd just heard, then she recovered and nodded once, satisfied. Their attorney tried to keep his voice professional, but I caught the slight lift in his tone. To confirm, he said, sliding another page forward, you're agreeing to transfer full ownership of Hawthorne Fabrication, the residential property, and the 2 vehicles, along with all associated assets and liabilities. Assets and liabilities. I let my eyes linger on that phrase like I was tired, like I barely understood what it meant anymore. Marianne's grip tightened again under the table. She didn't argue in front of them. She knew better than to reveal panic when the other side was already celebrating. She just leaned toward me and breathed, Mara, please, like she was trying to pull me back from a ledge. I didn't look at her. If I looked, I might flinch. If I flinched, Vanessa would smell it. So I nodded slowly and said, yes. Vanessa's eyes flicked to my mother like they were sharing a private victory. My stepfather exhaled through his nose and sat up straighter, already imagining himself in charge, already imagining employees falling in line, already imagining the company as a faucet he could turn on whenever. He wanted money. The meeting ended with handshakes that felt like threats. They left first, heads high, quiet laughter in the hallway. Their attorney shook Marianne's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Smart decision, he said, like he was congratulating her for talking me into surrender. When the door closed, Marianne finally spoke. What are you doing, she said, and her voice was still controlled, but the edge was real now. Tell me you didn't just agree to sign away your whole life. I leaned back in my chair and let my face go blank, like the exhaustion was heavier than logic. I needed to stop, I said softly. I can't keep doing this. Her eyes narrowed. She'd heard that line from clients who were truly cornered, and from clients who were acting. Marianne didn't get paid to guess. She got paid to know. You're not a quitter, she said. And you're not careless. So either you're in shock or you have a plan. If you have a plan, you need to tell me now. I held her gaze for a long beat, then I lowered my eyes to the conference table. There was a thin scratch in the wood, like someone had dragged a pen across it during a tense moment. I traced it with my fingertip like I was thinking. Then I said, quietly, I need you to trust me. That didn't calm her. It made her look more alert. Like a soldier hearing movement in the dark. Mara, she said, trust goes both ways. I gave her a small nod. I know. We walked out together, the city cold and bright, cars hissing past on wet streets. I kept my hands in my coat pockets, kept my pace steady, kept my expression tired. Anyone watching would have seen a woman who had finally lost. That was the point. Back home, the kids were at school. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts sound louder. I went into the kitchen and stood by the sink for a long time, staring out at the backyard where my grandfather used to sit on summer evenings, coffee in one hand, newspaper in the other, talking like the world was simple if you kept your word. I wasn't giving up on him. I was honoring him. In the only way that mattered. Because I had learned something growing up around machines and contracts and people who smiled while they tried to take advantage of you. The loud fight is what they prepare for. The quiet trap is what they never see coming. They had been siphoning money for months. I hadn't confronted them openly because I knew what they would do. They would delete emails, rewrite narratives, cry to relatives, claim I was unstable, claim I was overwhelmed, claim I was unfit to run anything. They would make me the villain before I had a chance to prove they were thieves. So I did it the way my grandfather would have. I gathered proof. I documented everything. I kept my mouth shut. When Marianne first warned me, I didn't argue. I asked questions. Not emotional questions, practical ones. What happens to liabilities when ownership transfers? What happens to responsibility for corporate conduct? What happens if authorities are already investigating and the company changes hands before action is taken? Marianne didn't like the questions, but she answered them. And that's when the shape of my plan became real. If they forced the company into their hands, they would also force the company's history into their hands. All the paperwork. All the transactions. All the fraud committed under the company name. The shell vendors. The fake invoices. The money that disappeared and reappeared as home renovations and new cars and weekend trips Vanessa posted online with captions about working hard. They thought they were stealing quietly. They didn't understand that paper trails are louder than screams when the right people start listening. 3 days after the settlement meeting, Vanessa showed up at the shop with a box of donuts and a smile like she was running for office. She walked the floor like she owned it already, greeting employees by name, asking questions she didn't understand the answers to, trying to look like she belonged. I watched from my office window and kept my face calm. My foreman, Rick, knocked on my door later. He'd worked with my grandfather for 28 years. He didn't get fooled by smiles. He got fooled by results. Something going on, he said, not a question. I met his eyes. Rick wasn't family by blood, but he was loyalty in human form. I'm handling it, I said. He studied me for a second, then nodded once. Just tell me if you need the floor shut down. We'll do it. I'll tell you, I said. That night, my mother called, sweetness dripping through the phone. She asked how I was holding up. She said she was proud of me for being mature. She said we could finally heal, finally be a family again. Then she slipped in the real question, casual, like she was asking about weather. When will you sign, she asked, so we can start moving things around. Moving things around. She meant selling equipment. She meant changing accounts. She meant grabbing whatever wasn't nailed down before anyone noticed. I kept my voice soft. Soon, I said. I'm just waiting for the court date. My stepfather took the phone, his voice confident. He told me not to do anything with the accounts until transfer was complete. He told me not to cancel any vendor relationships Vanessa had set up. He told me to keep operations stable because any disruption could affect valuation. I said, of course. After I hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum. My heart was steady, not because I was fearless, but because I knew exactly what was coming. They were rushing. And people who rush make mistakes. The final hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. On Wednesday night, I tucked my kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat beside them longer than usual. My daughter asked if Grandma was still mad. My son asked if we were moving. I told them the truth in the simplest way I could. Some adults made choices that weren't safe, I said. I'm making sure we're okay. They accepted it the way children do when they trust you completely. That trust was the most precious thing I owned. When they fell asleep, I went downstairs, opened my laptop, and checked the last message from Marianne. It was short. Everything is in place. I stared at that line until my eyes burned. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked at my grandfather's ring again. Tomorrow, they would walk into court wearing their victory. Tomorrow, they would finally get what they demanded. And tomorrow, the truth would walk in right behind them. The courthouse felt colder than usual that morning, not because of the weather, but because of the certainty in the air. The kind of certainty that settles when people think the outcome is already written. I arrived early, like I always did, and sat on one of the hard benches outside the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly. Around me, lawyers moved with purpose, heels clicking, voices low. Everyone looked busy. Everyone looked confident. They arrived 10 minutes later. My stepfather walked in first, shoulders back, jaw set, wearing a suit I'd only ever seen him wear at weddings and funerals. My mother followed, lips pressed tight, eyes scanning the room as if she were already measuring what belonged to her. Vanessa came last, heels sharp against the floor, hair perfectly styled, confidence radiating from her like perfume. She caught my eye and gave me a look that was almost kind. Almost. It was the look you give someone when you think you've won but want to pretend you didn't enjoy the fight. Marianne joined me quietly, her folder tucked under her arm. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside me and let the silence do its work. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was something different in it now. Not fear. Focus. You still sure? She asked. I nodded once. Yes. She studied my face like she was trying to read between my answers. Then she closed her folder and said, all right. That was it. No speeches. No warnings. Just acceptance. Marianne was good at reading people. She knew now that whatever I was doing, it wasn't surrender. Inside the courtroom, everything unfolded exactly the way they expected it to. The judge reviewed the settlement terms in a steady voice. Full transfer of ownership. The company. The properties. The vehicles. All assets and all liabilities. She asked if I understood the agreement and if I was entering into it voluntarily. Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly. Vanessa smiled. My mother exhaled. My stepfather leaned back like a man finally allowed to relax. I signed the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Each signature felt strangely light, like I was setting something down instead of giving something up. Marianne watched closely, her face unreadable, her hands still. When I finished, the judge prepared to conclude. The courtroom settled into that peculiar quiet that comes right before the end of something important. Papers rustled. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. Then the doors opened. Two men in dark suits stepped inside, badges clipped neatly to their belts. They didn't rush. They didn't look around. They walked straight to Vanessa's attorney and handed him a sealed envelope. I watched his face change as he read it. The color drained first. Then his mouth tightened. He leaned in toward Vanessa, whispering so low I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Vanessa's smile vanished. What? She said sharply, her voice carrying in the quiet room. That was when everything unraveled. My mother stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. My stepfather's hands curled into fists on the table. The agents stepped forward, voices calm and procedural, announcing themselves, stating charges, listing names. Vanessa screamed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was pure panic, raw and unfiltered. She stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, hands shaking as she tried to speak over the agents, insisting there had been a mistake, insisting this was my doing, insisting she was being framed. My mother cried out my name like I could stop it. Like I owed her rescue. My stepfather stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes glassy, as cuffs were placed around his wrists. I stayed seated. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. The judge slammed the gavel, shouting for order, but the moment was already gone. The agents escorted them out, one by one, past the rows of stunned observers. Vanessa's voice echoed down the hallway, breaking into sobs that sounded nothing like confidence. Marianne touched my arm gently. Let's go, she said. We left through a side exit before reporters could gather. Outside, the sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain. I breathed in deeply for the first time in what felt like months. It wasn't over. Not yet. But the hardest part was done. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, interviews, and quiet confirmations. Federal cases don't move on emotion. They move on evidence. And there was plenty of it. Transaction histories. Shell companies. Wire transfers that crossed state lines. Approvals signed electronically and physically. A trail too clean to deny. Vanessa tried to claim ignorance. My parents tried to claim trust. None of it held. I didn't attend every hearing. I didn't read every article. I focused on my children. On school lunches and bedtime stories. On keeping their routines intact while the adult world collapsed around us. One evening, Rick stopped by the house after work. He didn't bring paperwork. He didn't bring questions. He brought a six-pack and a quiet nod. He would have been proud, he said, and I knew exactly who he meant. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table and finally let myself feel it. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. Deep, steady relief. Like finally stepping off a tightrope you didn't realize you'd been walking your whole life. They thought they were taking everything from me. What they actually took was responsibility for their own choices. And that was something I was more than willing to give away. After the courtroom emptied, life didn't explode the way people imagine when justice finally lands. There were no fireworks. No dramatic music. Just a long stretch of quiet where the noise had been. The investigation moved forward without me needing to push it. That was the strange part. Once everything tipped, it kept tipping on its own. Subpoenas went out. Accounts were frozen. Properties were evaluated. Every decision my family had rushed through came back under a microscope, stripped of intention and examined only for facts. Facts are merciless. Vanessa tried to contact me from the first holding facility they placed her in. The voicemail was frantic, her voice breaking between anger and pleading. She said my name over and over like it was a lifeline she could still grab. I didn't listen to the full message. I deleted it halfway through. Some conversations don't deserve a response. My mother wrote instead. Long emails. Careful wording. She spoke about misunderstanding, about stress, about fear of being left behind. She said families fight and heal, that blood matters more than money, that we could still fix this if I helped her explain things. I didn't reply. Silence wasn't punishment. It was protection. My stepfather's attorney tried one last maneuver, claiming technical errors, procedural confusion, anything that could blur intent. It didn't work. The paper trail was clean and unforgiving. Every signature matched. Every approval was traceable. Every transfer lined up with purchases that had nothing to do with business operations. The company they'd fought to control became the thing that condemned them. In the middle of all of it, I still went to work every day. I walked the floor. I checked production schedules. I answered client calls. Employees watched me carefully at first, waiting for collapse, waiting for anger, waiting for chaos. It never came. I didn't tell them everything, but they didn't need the details. They could feel stability when it returned. They could feel when leadership wasn't being yanked back and forth by greed or ego. Machines ran smoother when decisions were clear. People worked better when trust wasn't performative. Slowly, the tension drained from the building. At home, my kids adjusted faster than I expected. Children are incredibly perceptive. They know when adults are lying even if they don't know why. The house felt lighter without constant phone calls, without surprise visits, without adults speaking in coded tones that carried threat under politeness. One night, my daughter asked me if we were safe now. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. We are. That answer mattered more than any legal victory. Months later, the sentences came down. There were plea deals, not out of remorse, but because evidence removes options. Prison time was real, not symbolic. Restitution orders followed, stripping away everything they'd tried to hoard. Homes sold. Accounts seized. Assets redistributed to cover damages and penalties. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see it. What mattered was what came after. The company survived, but it changed. I restructured it. Cut unnecessary contracts. Tightened oversight. Promoted people who had earned trust quietly for years. We didn't chase explosive growth. We focused on consistency, reliability, and integrity, the same values my grandfather built it on. Clients noticed. Word travels fast when a business stabilizes after chaos. New contracts came in. Not flashy ones. Solid ones. The kind that last. I kept my personal life small. Deliberate. Mornings were for coffee and quiet before the kids woke up. Evenings were for homework, cooking together, talking about their day. Weekends were for parks, libraries, and doing nothing in particular. That kind of nothing is priceless. Occasionally, someone would ask if I felt guilty. If I regretted not intervening sooner. If I wished things had ended differently. The honest answer was complicated. I didn't want my family destroyed. I wanted them to stop. But stopping people who don't believe rules apply to them usually means letting consequences speak louder than compassion ever could. I didn't lose my family in that courtroom. I lost the illusion that they were something they never truly were. And once that illusion was gone, everything else became clearer. By the time everything was officially over, the quiet had settled in so deeply that it felt permanent. Not empty. Not lonely. Just calm. The last legal document arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped into my mailbox between a grocery flyer and a school notice. I stood at the counter reading it twice, then a third time, just to be sure. Final disposition. No pending appeals. No remaining claims. No further contact required. The language was dry, almost boring, which somehow made it more powerful. After years of tension, threats dressed up as concern, and affection used like leverage, it ended not with drama, but with certainty. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need reminders anymore. The past had stopped chasing me. The company continued to grow in its own steady way. Nothing explosive, nothing risky. We invested in people first, not shortcuts. I brought in outside auditors regularly, not because I suspected problems, but because transparency was the foundation now. Employees noticed. They stopped whispering. They stopped bracing themselves for sudden changes. Work became work again, not survival. Rick retired that winter. On his last day, we shut down the floor early and gathered near the loading bay. He didn't like speeches, so I kept it simple. I thanked him for his loyalty, his honesty, and for staying when it would have been easier to walk away. He hugged me awkwardly, cleared his throat, and said, "Your grandfather would sleep easy knowing you're here." That night, I went home and told my kids stories about their great-grandfather. Not the legal battles. Not the betrayals. Just the man who built things carefully and believed in doing right even when it cost more. I wanted them to inherit values, not resentment. Occasionally, I wondered if any of them thought about me from wherever they were now. If my mother replayed conversations in her head. If Vanessa still believed she'd been wronged instead of caught. Those thoughts passed quickly. Closure didn't require understanding from the other side. What surprised me most was how little anger remained. I had expected rage to linger, to flare up unexpectedly, to poison moments that were supposed to be peaceful. Instead, anger dissolved once it no longer served a purpose. It had protected me while I needed clarity. After that, it quietly stepped aside. One evening, months later, I stood in the backyard as the sun dipped behind the trees. My kids chased each other across the grass, laughing hard enough to leave them breathless. The house behind me was warm, lived in, safe. Not impressive. Not flashy. Just ours. That was when it fully hit me. I hadn't won by taking something back. I'd won by refusing to be manipulated into giving myself away. There are people who believe strength looks like confrontation, raised voices, dramatic exits. Sometimes it does. But sometimes strength is patience. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's letting people walk straight into the consequences of their own choices while you step aside. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Family doesn't mean access. Love doesn't mean control. And loyalty that demands self-destruction isn't loyalty at all. I didn't lose everything that day in court. I shed what was never meant to be mine. And what remained was more than enough.